So, Adam, how generally speaking, folks on the left, I consider myself on the left, and we kind of analyze and criticize like systems for outcomes. We are
big picture kind of thing.
we look at the big picture. We're less apt to blame the individual, and we look for systemic solutions as opposed to just bootstrappy, you have to do this on your own, or the only way that you can fix it is on your own. So like
almost like we live in a society.
Right.
Yeah.
So like when I see a poor person, my first instinct is not to say like, oh, it's totally their fault. There's no reason other than their laziness or their, whatever, that like they're poor because of themselves. That's not my first thought. Of course, like people are individuals and people have agency, and there's, there's always some mix. But like, I can't fix a person's like their ideas. But we have statistics and we have data, and we can say like, oh wow, so when you do this, like when you implement a policy that like gives people health care, for instance, people are more successful. Or when you implement a policy that that gives people retirement pensions as a public policy that decreases poverty among the elderly population, and we don't have people like dying in the street of old age. So these are good things, I think, and those are systemic solutions to systemic problems. And of course, we can always talk about, like, if I'm talking to an individual, like a family member, like I'm going to talk to them about ways that they can individually make their life better. But if I'm talking on a systemic level, for looking for ways to make society better, I'm going to look for societal solutions, generally.
And, I don't think it's that crazy to want to live in a better world and a better society, better community, better state, better country. I mean, that seems, I don't know, it just seems natural for me that, hey, I want everyone to be a little bit better off tomorrow than they were today. I don't see that as a very radical idea, but apparently it is to, desire that your community actually get better.
Right. Yeah, so that's kind of generally speaking how we see the world. And on the flip side, generally speaking, conservative, like anti-collectivist, pro-individualist people, they're like the opposite of that, right? They say that, nothing is ever, if you ever look at systems and society, you're totally negating your own ability to make the world better or your life better, or like it's all about you. It's all about you. You there's not a society, there's no such thing as society. You're an individual and you choose how your life end up. It's all about you. It's all about you. So that's generally kind of how things go. So that is like not exactly what Dave Ramsey says here. So let's go ahead and listen to what he says.
Okay, I own rental property, single-family homes, among many other properties that we own. And if I raise my rent to be market rate, that does not make me a bad Christian. I did not displace the person out of that house if they can no longer afford it. The marketplace did. The economy did. The ratio of the income that they earned to their housing expense displaced them. I didn't cause any of that. And so you are not displacing them. You're taking too much credit for what's going on. If they need to move to a cheaper house because they can't afford, they're going to move to a lesser house. Because if they move, they're going to pay market rent. Okay,
so he says there, and that's all that I wanted to see the clip. He said, it's like he doesn't even say, like he doesn't even say, oh, my expenses increased, so I had to increase the rent. Oh, it costs more to hire labor to get people to fix problems at my rental property. He just says this amorphous, invisible market, the market. A house next door to me sold for higher, so now I have to increase rent. Even though my expenses have not gone up at all, it's just like a house 10 yards away from me happened to sell for a high price, and so now all of a sudden I get to charge my tenants higher, more money. For I haven't done anything. I haven't worked any harder. I haven't paid any more. I just literally I get to suck more money from my tenants because the house next door to me sold for more money. I mean, can you imagine? And like on a certain level, what he's saying is like, there's some truth to it, as in, if he were not the landlord, there would be another landlord that would be doing the same thing because of these market forces, and because you can charge higher rent, somebody would, most landlords would, in the situation that he is in, but he's not explaining why he doesn't have to make that decision. He can choose to not raise rent when his expenses don't go up. He can choose as an individual, as a Christian, to not raise rent when his expenses do not go up, and to not suck the blood out of his tenants literally just because he can. Literally just because he can. And he's totally absolving himself of his personal responsibility. He's totally absolving himself of his personal responsibility and blaming everything he does on society and on this amorphous system that we live in, and saying it's okay for me as an individual to act this way because other people are acting this way. Because other people are acting this way, it is fine for me to take more money from people that are poorer than me, and even though it's not costing me any more money, I'm not putting in any more effort, I'm not working any harder, I'm just taking more. I'm just taking more, and that's okay because of society, because of the system.
That's the system we have, right? And it is really convenient how that kind of flips on and off depending on context, and in a way that can try to absolve you of any guilt you may feel.
Right.
And because I like the way you set this up before the clip. I consider myself to be, a materialist, and I am someone who does look at things from that systemic angle. But of course, we all have our individual choices and consequences from those choices, our own personal responsibility. That conservatives love to harp on that phrase, but I don't know anyone who just believes there's no such thing as personal responsibility, no matter how deep you go down like a Marxist, historical, materialist kind of viewpoint. And I think that we can acknowledge multiple true things. It is true that is the system we have, and you're right, that probably another landlord could have fulfilled that role. In the big picture, we're all, cogs in a machine. But we are also all human beings who are living among other human beings, and we all make our own choices in how we operate in this machine. So, you can't have it both ways, and if personal responsibility is real, don't you have some responsibility to try to live the most ethical life you can in the system that we have, while at the same time seeking to change that system to be a better one for human beings and our values.
Right. Yeah, I mean, exactly. Like, so, we can, and we've been calling back to the first thing that we talked about today, like, a lot, so we can say that, maybe there are systemic reasons that police officers are, that it's not even their individual responsibility, quote unquote, that there is a disproportionate amount of police violence, but it is on an individual to not murder. Like, even though there are systemic forces pushing you towards that, it's still ultimately your decision to pull the trigger.
Absolutely.
And for anybody else who commits murder, there are, and even more so for poor people, for poor people who commit murder than for cops. There are systemic forces that push you into gangs, that and that do all these things, and that make you more likely to commit crime.
Right.
But of course, that doesn't absolve you of making the choice. We can talk about, okay, there's systemic solutions to these things, and we can make crime go down through attacking systemic solutions, but that doesn't absolve the person who pulled the trigger of pulling the trigger. They have to be held to account, and we can fix things moving forward to make it so that other people are not pushed to that same decision. But of course, it's still their ultimate responsibility and their agency to pull the trigger, and it is exactly that same problem. Dave Ramsey, it is his ultimate individual agency, his individual choice, and his personal responsibility to be a fair and just landlord, as if such a thing, can exist, and it's not illegitimate in its own right to be a landlord.
I think it's a very important distinction, though, because you're right, and I agree with the example of the police, because as critical as I am of the police, I recognize that there are people who join the police department with the best of intentions. Maybe their heart was moved to do this because of some experience growing up, or maybe they just really believe, hey, this is the way I can protect and serve my community. I have a dangerous neighborhood I grew up in. I want to make it safer.
Right.
I want to save a cat from a tree. Whatever may motivate them to pursue that. I recognize there are probably people like that. They're not, I'm sure there, just as there are plenty who are flat out reactionary bigots who join for the pure reasons of getting that kind of power and ability to inflict violence without repercussion. Right? We can acknowledge that both people exist. But as you said, so if you are that good-hearted person, you're a reform-minded person, you join the police department because you're going to change things from the inside and make it better, there will come a time in your life, probably not too far into your career, where you're on the precipice and you must decide, do I bow to the pressures of the system or do I, and abandon my values, or do I stay true to my values of trying to make things better and be good? That contradiction will arise, and so I think at the end of the day, if you bow to that system and as a result someone is murdered, someone is injured, someone is falsely accused or falsely incarcerated, that's on you. Whatever was in your heart and whatever systemic pressures you felt there, from the top down, that does not absolve you of the harm done. And I know that's probably a really rambling, long way of reiterating that, but it does resonate with me. I mean, and I'm sure I'm not the only person involved with this program or listening to this program who has tried entering things to make it better, right? How many of us have tried participating in electoral politics to try to change things, or working inside institutions to try to change things?
Right.
And you're probably going to run your head into a wall, and you do reach those moments of contradiction between your rationale for being there, your values you hold, and the pressures of the system or institution you're in. So the Dave Ramsey types, they love to pick and choose, and like I said, conveniently, it seems to be relevant when they can absolve themselves of their own guilt and actions. But not
he
others.
even in the same clip, he even says like, "Oh, it's not my fault that they're homeless; it's their fault that they're homeless." He even says something about
you don't
how,
know that.
like he says something about how like that it's the ratio of their income to the rent that made them homeless.
As if
and
it's all this like mystical thing of which humans have no part in. Yeah, it really is both ways, where we mystify all this. The economy is not this thing that came from God, that came from on high, that we have no control over, and that is sort of the neoliberal standpoint, right, that we've lived under for the last 40 years or so, that basically there is no alternative. This is just the way it is, the market overall.
Right.
So yeah, so it's like a mystification of what's really happening with the political economy and people's real material lives and the decisions and policies that are made that affect that. But then, if you're on the losing side of that, well, it must just all be your individual choices.
Right. Yeah. And Jeb in the chat said that, basically asked, does his point show that the spate of smash and grabs, the looting and all this stuff that has been shown on right-wing media, does that mean that they are actually justified due to inflation and the free market adjustments making items unaffordable? And of course, Ramsey wouldn't think that because that's, because poor people stealing deodorant is much worse for society than me as a rich person making a poor person homeless. Like, of course,
right.
Obviously, even though normal people, like working people, would say that a person being homeless is a worse outcome than Walgreens having one less stick of deodorant.
Right. Yeah, and I think a lot of it boils down to that. How do you feel about your fellow human beings?
Right.
And again, going back to the living in a society. I know it's kind of a meme joke at this point and everything, but we do live in a society.
Yeah.
And it is hard to get people to believe in empathy. Certainly when you have folks like a Dave Ramsey who have such a massive audience and there's so much money spent trying to convince us that, no, we don't live in the society and it is all about you and it really doesn't matter what happens to your neighbors.
Right.
If they're homeless, to hell with them, right? As long as you can still afford this nice subscription for $19.99 a month plus tax and fees.
Yeah.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.